Good morning. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Free Press Media Press Inc., an alternative parties books publisher, sponsors this podcast. I'm Andrew Bouchard. Welcome to the Long Live Alternative Parties podcast. Today we have another exciting guest, an individual named Dennis Misigoy, who is running for office, and he's going to tell us about his exciting campaign and all the exciting things he's been doing. Welcome to the podcast, Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Dennis, let us get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Sure. Let me try to hit at least the major points. I'm running for U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida. Lifelong Floridian, born and raised in Miami-Dade County. Youngest son of two immigrant parents. I have, among other things, been involved in I'm running as a Libertarian. I've been a member of the Libertarian Party and sort of active, at least in the local county affiliates, since 2015, 2016. Back in 2016 as well, in November in the general election there, I ran for and was elected to local office as on a seat on the Board of Supervisors, Board of Supervisors of the Special Taxing District in which I used to live down there. I served there for just over 4 years. Left there when I moved out of the area and moved up to Central Florida, but I'm here now and, like I said, filed to run for actually statewide office to try to run as represent the libertarian views and to give us an opportunity, and particularly I think in this moment in history at this time where I think it's so important for this message and these principles and perspective to be heard and represented that I've decided to go ahead and take the step and just attempt to run this campaign, put my experience and everything else I have to use to try to give folks in this state a serious alternative to what we get from the two-party system.
Excellent. Congratulations on winning that election for Board of Supervisors for that special tax district. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So what was your experience like on that? What did you learn, and what are you carrying over to this election?
A number of things. Number one is a recognition of sort of the limits of the power of any one person. I spent the first 2 years of my term there, I spent the first 2 years that I was on the board basically being alone. It was there were 5 members of the board, myself included, and on pretty much every contentious vote and on pretty much every contentious vote, I lost 4-1 or 3-1, maybe if somebody missed the meeting. But that was my experience for 2 years. There were projects and spending that the other members of the board wanted to go through. We also had issues as far as the scheduling and location of the meetings, which were very inaccessible to the average working person in the community. Those are things I wanted to change, and I wasn't able to change them for the first 2 years I was there. In 2018, we had midterm elections. I was able to kind of inspire a couple other people, even though they weren't libertarians necessarily, to run and take over a couple of seats there. And once that happened, we were able to kind of really change things around. A bunch of those projects I mentioned, we were able to save about 78% of the money that was allocated to those projects. We were able to save that for the community. We were able to bring the meetings to a location and time that was accessible to folks within the community. And so there was a lot of good things we were able to do, but part of that first was going through that challenge of being at odds with everybody else. And it's something that I recognize that change doesn't come very quickly, but you've got to kind of step up and take the reins for it. So that was one of the things that really stuck out from my experience. I always kind of jokingly call those first couple of years like the Ron Paul experience of always being the one no vote on this sort of stuff. And any motion I ever made, anything I ever wanted to do outside of, a motion to adjourn a meeting or something, everything I tried to do died for even lack of a second. So nobody on the rest of the board was even really willing to give a shot to anything I was trying to do. So it was a humbling first 2 years, but it's kind of somewhat what you expect when you know what the makeup of the board is.
Yeah.
And I think that translates to a degree with the reality of running for higher office as well. If I were to get elected to the U.S. Senate, and obviously that's a long shot, I'm not naive about that, but even if I were to get elected and every other libertarian running for federal office in 2022 were to get elected, we would not really be able to do any of the things we want to do once we're elected, you know, and that's a reality check that we need to be aware of. But it's the first step in the process of actually bringing change, because once we're there and we can set a standard and set an example and also prove the fact that we can be there, that is, you know, the first step to really, you know, inspiring others to take the leap, and it's the first step in the process of change, and it's a slow process, but my argument to everyone is to say, well, look at where we are right now. We're $30 trillion in debt. We've got inflation at 8%? I've heard higher by some estimates. And we're also somehow dancing along the precipice of nuclear war with Russia 30 years after the Soviet Union is dead, inexplicably. And so if not now, then when? You know, if we don't recognize there's a need for change now, and I think we should be able to recognize it. And I say we, I mean as the American people, as the electorate, hopefully can recognize that. But they can't do anything about it if we don't give them the alternative. So that's what I'm here to try to do. And like I said, taking that experience to really be able to do that.
Sure. So kindly describe the demographics of your district in Florida.
Well, remember, we're talking about the U.S. Senate seat, so the district is the entire state. So Florida's quite diverse.
Okay.
Obviously, the big population centers are the major cities. When you talk about South Florida, the three counties, I believe, with the highest population and highest number of registered voters are going to be Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. Obviously, those are going to lean quite a bit, tend to lean quite a bit bluer, but obviously there's quite a bit of red as well in Miami-Dade. I shouldn't exclude Monroe County. Obviously, it's not quite as populated, but it is a little bit further south. That's the Florida Keys. But point being, Miami-Dade has its own sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Quirks, in the sense of having the sort of long time Republican-leaning Cuban population. That's part of where I come from. My mother's came here from Cuba a very, very long time ago. And that's one aspect of it. Obviously, you have something similar but not quite the same in terms of the demographics, but certainly the political leanings here in Central Florida around the Orlando metropolitan area. And then obviously to varying degrees but lesser across the rest of the state. It's a microcosm, I think, of America in a general sense, but I think maybe with a little bit higher well-established immigrant population, but which doesn't necessarily always follow the stereotypes of it, because as I mentioned, you know, Cubans have typically gone Republican for a very long time, and so historically, let's say. So, but obviously we're, I think, the third most populous state at this time. So there's a lot of people here, and it's growing obviously with what's going on with COVID and the movement of population. Even before that, obviously, because Florida is a low tax state. Obviously, it's a very desirable climate. I should say low tax. You know, there's no state income tax and no local income tax. So a very different environment from a lot of other major metropolitan areas, and particularly those that are sort of desirable in terms of climate as well. So we get all kinds of people, but you know, and it's hard to box them. I think here you really need to have a message that you can give to a real broad spectrum of people. You really can't target a very narrow set of people, because what matters, what is going to matter is going to probably vary a little bit slightly versus folks out in the more rural areas, some who are a little more or less impacted by, say, environmental issues as well, versus those in the urban centers and, like I said, between a lot of immigrant population as well as a lot of the sort of normally Republican-leaning voters that are really always up in arms about every kind of anything you can label socialism, let's say that.
Huh. So kindly describe our audience your perception of the role the Senate position is something people are familiar with. It's not an obscure position. Still, kindly explain how you perceive the role. Shall you get it? What do you see as your function of the job?
I partly go with the sort of Calvin Coolidge mentality of the most, it's more important to stop bad laws from passing than it is from good laws. I think like I mentioned, obviously at first, I think it's going to be real difficult to make change happen. If I was elected, it's very unlikely that I would be able to, pass all the kind of legislation that I would like to do, which would obviously be stuff to end various, let's see. We'd like to cut military spending, and we'd like to cut spending in general. As I mentioned, $30 trillion in debt, crazy inflation. We've got to put a stop to this. Ideally, if we wanted to, as well give the average American an alternative to being stuck with the dollar in the shape that it's in, we could always consider legalizing some alternatives. It should be within the Congress's power to allow an alternative for use as legal tender, whether that ends up being something commodity-backed, like by gold, or whether you're talking about cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and such as an alternative, but to be used and recognized as legal tender. Those are things we can do. Pulling back on American and bringing a real change to American foreign policy. But again, like I said, it would be unlikely that I would be able to really push all those things in an effective way at this point. So, in the early days, certainly in the first 2 years of the term, where we would almost necessarily have very, very little power, the best you can do is probably going to be stand up and be a consistent voice for this stuff, vote against all of the insane things that are going on. We just passed a $1.5 trillion spending bill in the House of Representatives. I don't think anybody really read it except whoever put it together, if even that. They got it, I think, the day before, the late night the day before, and voted on in the afternoon. It was about 2,741 pages. So it's patently irresponsible, the fact that people are voting and passing legislation in that sort of environment. But as I mentioned, 1.5 trillion in spending, which included another 13 or 14 billion to Ukraine, among other things. So this would be all about, at this stage, realistically not necessarily being able to change those things. Most likely would be to set an example. Consistently vote against these things, speak out against these things, take advantage of that position to communicate with people, and really it's going to be about building towards the future, but showing that we can earn a position here, and making sure that it's absolutely clear what it is we stand for, which is cutting back on what I always like to point out is the absolute worst things that government does, which are those things which really are destructive to people's lives. And that runs the range of waging needless wars all over the world, of interfering in the internal affairs of other countries, of destroying our currency, and disrupting our economy by making it less efficient through all these sort of central economic planning schemes, as well as criminalization of drugs and all these sort of, we talk about the war on drugs or the war on this or that, which oftentimes end up being a war on the American people. So things of that nature, setting an example of and making it crystal clear who it is and what we stand for from a position like that, I think would have tremendous value. And again, those certainly the first 2 years, if elected, would absolutely be trying to build towards the future. As I mentioned, change is not going to happen quickly, but the very first thing to do is to set an example and to make it clear to people who we are and where we stand on these issues, and to draw that very clear difference between us and the other guys.
Sure. So who are your opponents in this race? What are they like?
So and this is part of the reason also why I think it's important to be in this, the most likely Republican candidate is going to be the incumbent. That's Marco Rubio. If you remember, he was in the 2016 presidential primaries. And so he's a bit more high profile than necessarily the average Republican senator. On the Democratic side, it's certainly not decided officially in any sense, but most likely the odds-on favorite for the Democratic candidate is going to be Val Demings. She's a congresswoman from here in Central Florida, representing Orange County. Actually, her husband is the mayor of Orange County, Florida, which is the county in the Orlando area, in which Orlando is. She's former police chief in Orlando as well, and she was also pretty big in the Biden Veep stakes back in 2020 when when they were searching for and ultimately selected Kamala Harris as his vice president. So both sort of prominent figures, and I think both have very awful voting records, voting for the 2022 NDAA, just to kind of bring this all back, where they authorized over $750 billion in military spending for this year, and they'll probably end up spending more, of course, but just the fact that after we ended the longest war in American history, we're still increasing military spending really says something. And that's
Sure.
both of them voting for it.
So they're both in support of that.
Yes, both voted for it, passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan consensus in both houses of Congress at the end of last year, and of course signed in by President Biden.
So what is your campaign strategy? How are you going to reach the voters?
I'm trying to take it one step at a time, but really in general, my thought is to try to leverage my own strengths and really leverage what's available to us in terms of technology these days. One of the things I think is most important, a distinction between trying to run a libertarian campaign today versus 30 years ago, obviously, is if I want to show someone my platform, I don't need to have a printout of it and hand it out to everybody or mail it out to everyone's house. And this is obviously basic stuff today for politicians, but you'd be surprised how many don't even give you their policy positions on their own websites. But the fact that that's something available. So I'm trying to do what I can in terms of reaching out in this way, take advantage of the data I have available to me. I'm doing live streams, usually at least once a week. I was doing twice for a little while, but if anyone wants to go out and check out Misigoy.com, it's just my last name, Misigoy.com. Usually on the front page there's a link to, or the live stream, the most recent one there posted, and trying to take advantage of some of that, try to create a little bit of content, and obviously still get out to places where possible. Tomorrow I plan to be at a local festival, Taste of Oviedo, or Oviedo, I think as the locals say it. It's a little hard for me as a Hispanic guy to get myself to say it that way, but I plan to be out there with one of the local county affiliates here in Florida, and it's a mix. I try not to overthink the conventional, because in reality we don't have the resources, and unlike the big party candidates, I'm not somebody who can just drop everything in life and just campaign full time. I'm still coming at this from the point of being a regular guy with a wife and kids, and trying to take care of my family and all this. But I think that this is important to do, and I'm trying to do my part and step up, and like I said, offer the people in this state an alternative. I think with the experience I have, it's important to do. And so, like I said, just to bring it back, leverage the skills I have in terms of technology, creating content, and keeping lines of communication open with people, and some direct outreach, some outreach targeted towards different groups. But like I said, it's all one thing at a time, and right now we're just kind of building stuff up still. It's still early. Even in our state, the primaries, although there's unlikely to be a Libertarian primary, but certainly for the Republicans and Democrats to finalize who their nominees will be, happens typically in August. So the general election then being in November. So that would really be the earnest time. Another thing was looking at, again, using some more modern mechanisms for doing outreach. Again, different areas where, like I said, it's all one thing at a time, and right now we're just kind of building stuff up still. It's still early. Even in our state, the primaries, although there's unlikely to be a Libertarian primary, but certainly for the Republicans and Democrats to finalize who their nominees will be, happens typically in August. So the general election then being in November. So that would really be the earnest time. Another thing was looking at, again, using some more modern mechanisms for doing outreach. Again, different areas where advertising in a digital way versus the sort of old conventional and print way is possible, but it's all one thing at a time, really. So.
Sure. So do you have a team with you that's helping your campaign, or are you doing it by yourself?
I do a lot by myself, probably more than I should. I have a few people who've been giving me a lot of consistent support, that have been able to help me with one thing or the other, but, probably still too much on my own. It's just, and I guess maybe that's, one of those, negative characteristics that don't suit very well for this sort of thing. But, like I said, that's been just one aspect of it. But there's a few people. It's a little loosely organized still at this time. Not a lot in the way of official titles, but I've had a lot of support, and hopefully will continue to.
Sounds good. So for our listeners out there, how can they support your campaign?
Well, the biggest thing right now, and I'll go back to a conversation I had a little over a year, or maybe not quite a year ago, but the first time I met Justin Amash, former congressman from Michigan. I met him and asking about, what could we learn from the two parties, he said, and he said, really, there's not really that much that's different or better about them. They just have more resources. So the biggest thing right now for me is trying to raise money. So if someone, here's what I'm talking about, here's this message, and think that we really need to move forward with this, I really ask them, you can go visit the website, as I mentioned, misigoy.com. You can just go ahead and put /donate, or you can go into the website from the homepage. There should be, depending on whether you're looking on a desktop or on a mobile, you're going to have near the top of that screen, you're going to have a button that says donate. You can click right there. And that's one of the biggest things right now is just trying to raise a little bit more money. If you don't have money, but you have some time and you want to put some energy into it, there's plenty to do that doesn't involve physically being in Florida, so you could be listening to this anywhere, and if you want to help out there, there's also a Get Involved link about getting involved and volunteering, so you can go there, fill that out as well. Let me know what you're available to, and we'll reach out to you and try to get you engaged in some of what we're doing. So every little bit counts and helps. So, but those are the main things.
Sounds great. Dennis, thank you kindly for coming on the podcast today and talking about the exciting things you're doing in the state of Florida running for office.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I wish you all the best with your campaign and all your other endeavors.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You too.